Greetings, Internet people. You're tuned into the Keep It Real RN channel. My name is Craig, and I'll be your host. And today I'm going to talk to you about life-changing experiences. Now, I really haven't talked about this with anybody, and I'm going to share it with you, my nursing and soon-to-be nursing audience. The other day, I logged on to my Facebook, and I saw a post by the mother of a patient I had taken care of. And this patient was 3 years old at the time that I took care of her. And on this Facebook post was a mother saying happy birthday to her daughter. And I took care of this little girl for weeks and months. Now, before I go on, I wanted to say that I always tell people it's generally not a good idea to have patients or family members as friends on Facebook, because it kind of blurs that line of professional distance. Professional distance is a coping mechanism that you need to learn as a nurse that allows you to be a part of some of the worst times in a person's life and yet go home and continue to function. And I've considered myself pretty good at it, actually. I can give 110% of myself when I'm working, and but I don't internalize it. I don't make other people's problems my problems, as it were. And the reason that's important is because, like I said, it allows you to put the keys in the car, start the car up, drive home, and deal with your own life and your own family and your own issues, and not dwell on things that you really have no control over. And friending families and patients on Facebook really blurs that professional distance. Like I said, when I'm taking care of somebody, I give my 110%. And then when I am no longer taking care of them, I choose not to follow up on them after they're out of my care. And I like to assume that everybody is doing well and carrying on with their lives. Because a caring relationship is one of those things that has a beginning, a middle, and it should have an end as well. Because you, as a healthcare provider, have to make room for that next patient that comes down the line. However, in this situation, I made an exception. It's the one and only exception I've ever made in my life. And this little girl's mother had sent me a friend request, and I sat on it for a long time thinking about it. The emotional part of me wanted to accept it because we had spent a lot of time in this little girl's hospital room, and I felt like there was some kind of a bond there because I shared this experience with this mom over the course of several weeks. But I sat on the friend request for a very long time before I finally accepted it. I gave it a lot of thought. So getting back to the story, on this Facebook post, the mom was wishing her little girl a happy birthday. Now, how this story goes without divulging too much patient information, which actually will blur what I'm trying to talk about. This little girl at the time was 3 years old and had a congenital heart defect and had surgery to correct that defect. And during the post-operative period, or the period in the intensive care unit, required the patient to be on a machine called ECMO. And for those of you out there who are not familiar with ECMO, ECMO is an acronym, ECMO. It stands for extracorporeal membrane oxygenation or oxygen exchange or whatever you want to say. And what that means is extracorporeal means outside the body or outside the circulatory system. And membrane oxygenator is a device that the blood flows through and the blood gets oxygenated and has carbon dioxide removed. And basically what it is, in its most simplest form, it's known as the heart-lung machine. Very similar to what they use in the operating room during open heart surgery. So this little girl was on ECMO, and if I remember right, I think that she eventually got weaned off of ECMO, and then a few days later deteriorated and needed to be put back on. So her heart and her lungs were failing her, and she got put back on a second time. And after she got put back on a second time, things were not really going very well. And this situation went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And this little girl's mom was at her bedside every single day, without fail. She was like one of the most dedicated mothers I've ever seen. And on the surface, it looked like she was coping unusually well considering the circumstances, because this is probably the worst thing that could possibly ever happen to a parent, is to see your child suffering and deteriorating before your eyes, and there's nothing you can do about it. So over the course of weeks, the child continued to deteriorate. Her heart and lungs were failing her, and their kidneys failed her. We tried peritoneal dialysis for a while. She was one of the very few pediatric patients that they actually did hemodialysis on. Kidneys were failing her. Her liver eventually failed her. And at the end of it all, even her skin was starting to fail, because the circulation to the microcirculation was that bad that the skin was actually starting to fail her. And like I said, this little girl's mother was there every day, and I took care of this patient many times. And I don't remember what her mom and I talked about, but I remember having several pretty deep conversations. And where this all ends up is, I remember this just like it was yesterday. And I remember, this car's coming down the road here. I remember this like it was yesterday. I remember this little girl's body was failing her, and we were getting to the point where pretty much any hope of recovery was gone. And the patient's mother, I finally came to the realization that this was going to be a terminal event. And so we switched from a life-saving scenario to a palliative type of scenario. I remember taking care of her on the very last day of this little girl's life, because they were going to withdraw life support the next morning, and I was working nights. And I remember in the late morning getting her cleaned up and basically getting her ready so that her mom could hold her for the last time. And that was like, you know, and I've taken care of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of patients. And, you know, there's been a lot of instances where I feel bad and I get a lump in my throat. But I've always been able to turn it off and continue on with life after it was over with. And this was a hard one. As I was getting this little girl cleaned up and ready to be put in her mom's arms for the very last time, the tears were just rolling down my cheeks. I was there, I was by myself with my thoughts and with this patient. And I remember the mom sitting on the couch. There was a little couch in the room. After I was done, she came in and sat on the couch. And by this time, she had been the patient had been disconnected from ECMO and was basically just on a ventilator. So I disconnected the patient from the ventilator, put her in her mom's arms, and reconnected the ventilator and walked out. And I didn't work the next day, so I didn't get to see how that played out, but I knew that when I put that girl in her mom's arms that morning, that was it. And I gave report to the oncoming nurse, I should say, and got my stuff and left. And I thought about this scenario all the way to my car. And usually I've been through some pretty heavy-duty stuff, and by the time my keys are in the car, I'm kind of starting to transition myself to thinking about something else. And I thought about it all the way home. And I went to bed that morning, and it was probably one of the first things I thought about when I woke up that afternoon. That's never happened to me before. And so anyway, the girl's mother had sent me this Facebook friend request. This was after the patient had passed away. And I had let a lot of time go by before I accepted it. And I accepted it because I shared one of the worst things that could ever happen to somebody. I mean, there is nothing worse than being a parent and watching your child suffer and worse than that, pass away. I mean, as a parent myself, if I were in that scenario, I would be making a deal with God and saying, geez, can we please trade places? I would be willing to trade places and be the one suffering if my kid could be okay. That's how much you love your kids. For those of you who don't have them, you'll experience that someday, maybe. So I thought about all of this as I was looking at this Facebook page, or this Facebook post of this mom wishing her daughter a happy birthday, and all of her friends and relatives also wishing her happy birthday. And the one thing that kind of got me was the mom said she was going to release a bouquet of balloons up to heaven for her daughter for her birthday. And after I thought about all this stuff, my hands went on the keyboard and I typed the words, happy birthday. Yep. So anyway, that's it. Until next time, keep it real.